I was a 72-year-old widow living alone. In my life, I only had my cat Tom, who died, and after he died, I was left with a lonely and quiet house. Because of this situation, my daughter Sarah told me that I needed to get an animal because I was constantly alone, and I finally decided to adopt a dog. And I adopted the dog from the shelter. "This will keep you company, Mom," he said, not knowing what kind of friendship I would eventually make. At first, Charlie was just a dog, but he was still a very attentive dog. He seemed to understand when I was feeling bad. He poked my hand with his cold nose, wagged his tail to restore my morale. I talked to him a lot, and I think that was normal enough. I mean, who doesn't talk to a dog when there's no one around? But things between us gradually decayed into something deeper, something I couldn't have imagined. I still remember that night clearly, the night I felt something had changed inside me. I was sitting on the couch, thinking about Tom. It was the anniversary of his death, and I was tired of crying. Charlie was sitting next to me, but that night was different. He wasn't just sitting there. He crawled out on the couch and put his head on my lap. His eyes were locked on mine, as if he could feel the weight of my grief. As if he understood, I said, "You're a good boy, Charlie. I'm running my fingers through your soft ears." I could feel the pain in my heart softening because of him. He made me believe that no one but himself could understand. The way he looked at me was not the kind of look a dog would give to its owner. It was deeper than that. There was an emotion. He was almost human in those eyes. As this activity continued for months, Charlie stopped being just a pet to me. Every morning when I woke up, I would find him resting on the end of the bed. The place occupied by Tom on the bed was now filled with my dog. Of course, I found it good, and in fact, it turned out to be something that I was eagerly looking forward to. Even for a quiet night with less heart, hugging warm bodies side by side had its own benefits. It wasn't just his warmth that made me feel different. It was the fact that he began to shadow me wherever I went, and very closely. But more than that, he started looking at me in a way that I found quite disturbing at first. His eyes never left me while the movements were being made. All the time, they were fixed on me with anticipation. It was only a matter of time before I began to feel that an inexplicable connection had formed between us. It was inexplicable because at the time I could not understand why. However, there was one evening that could be chosen from the others. It was late, and the people of the house were still asleep. I had just finished my tea and was about to retire for the night when Charlie literally ran into the room and ran straight towards me, as he normally does. But this time he didn't go and sleep on the end of the bed. He sat next to me in bed. His big black eyes bored me. I felt a strange flutter in my chest. "Charlie, what are you doing?" I asked softly, laughing to relieve the tension I suddenly felt. But he did not move. He just sat there and stared. And the way he looks at me with his eyes, it fills me with desire and snowballs. Can I feel my heart beating, but I can't take my eyes off him. I know this is nonsense, but there was a moment when I could have sworn that I saw something there. Yesterday was beyond normal. I felt confused as Charlie pulled me closer to my hips. He rested his head on her and wagged his tail slowly. But at that moment he was thrown towards something. I didn't know I was reaching out to caress him. My fingers trembled slightly. That's when I felt the warmth of a bond that I hadn't felt in years. Things hadn't been this weird for Tom since that night. Charlie became even more attached. I can't move without watching him sit and wait, always looking for a way to be close to me. The night we touched, he got closer and closer. His body was so close to mine that it felt closer than it should be. It was comfortable, yes, but there was something else that was uncomfortable. At first I couldn't admit it to myself. I remember waking up once. At night, The moonlight casts a shadow on the room where I'm lying on my bed. And there was Charlie lying next to me. His face was so close to me that I could feel his breath, and I had to stagger. When I reached out my hand and stroked his fur, a wave of warmth spread over me. He approached in response, and at that moment, half asleep and vulnerable, I felt it. The undeniable realization that my connection with him was deepening into something that I could not easily explain. I tried to get this thought out of my head by telling myself that it was just loneliness playing tricks on me. After all, I was an old woman who had lost the love of her life. Was it so wrong to seek comfort, even from a dog? But the feelings became even stronger. Charlie seemed to feel it too. He followed me everywhere. He was always by my side, and those eyes of his never left me. It felt as if we were two beings being pulled together by an unseen force, beyond the boundaries of normal friendship. It was strange, but I couldn't deny it anymore. I needed him more than I needed to admit it. Then came the night that changed everything. I was restless. I couldn't sleep decently. My thoughts were like a whirlwind, and I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was forming between us. I went downstairs hoping a glass of water would calm my nerves, but when I got back to the bedroom, Charlie was already there, lying on my side of the bed. When I approached, he didn't move, didn't even blink an eye. He just looked at me and waited, as if he was waiting for me. I got into bed hesitantly at first, but when I got under the duvet, Charlie approached me. His body was pressing against me in a very relaxing way. My wide moon body, like the constellations, descended into her dark world and froze her smile when it got muddy. I should have retreated for this purpose because nature lost its freshness for a while. But instead, I let her stay there. We were quietly melting her warmth. Then my body filled the gaps that had been empty for so long that I should have been ashamed. But I wasn't when we lay there. Knowing that Charlie was with me, I felt an unknown kind of feeling. It was a calm unlike any calm I've felt since Tom's death. It probably seemed wrong. But on the other hand, it was true in a way that I can't explain one way or another. We spent a considerable amount of time there in the dark. There's no reason to get up. Two Doritos trying to switch off from each other in the following days. It was a chaotic mixture of confusion and guilt. It's a developing relationship between Charlie and me. But at the same time, I couldn't stop myself. I needed him so much. I never realized that the gap was so deep. But as the weeks went by, I began to decipher the facts. The continuity of the unusual emotional interference I had with my hybrid was not healthy. I was not satisfied in my life, and I was especially affected by his uncontrollability. And now I found myself in something I could not even imagine. Stopping was the first thing that came to mind. When it was over, it made me face reality. I was looking for something in Charlie that I should look for from people, family and friends. Admittedly, it was hard to accept. But the truth was out like day. I had to break this toxic bond before it grew any more. Charlie was a wonderful and loyal dog, but he was not the solution to my futile efforts. Charlie couldn't close the gap that Tom left behind, so I gradually retreated. I spent more time with Sarah and my grandchildren, reunited with old friends. Found ways to fill my life with things I once enjoyed. Of course, Charlie was always there, always with me. But I actively set the boundaries I needed. I remembered that he was just a dog. He was my dog, but not my partner. Looking back, I realized that it's very easy for loneliness to take a person to strange, unexpected places decadently. I had let my grief affect my decisions, and in doing so, I formed an unhealthy bond. But I eventually found my way back and learned to trust those who loved me. And most importantly, no matter how much I loved Charlie, I learned that he could never satisfy the need to connect with others. And now I'm here in a quiet house where Charlie is lying at my feet, just like he always does. I wish I could step back and say that everything is back to normal after the decision to create a decoupling between me and Charlie. But the truth is, the comeback has been a long and steep climb. Some days, when the quiet evenings became too much for me to bear, I doubted myself and looked for Charlie's solace. After all, familiar, old habits were dying hard. Every day I was reminding myself that this was an unhealthy relationship, and that this was categorically wrong for both me and him. He was a dog, an animal that showed unconditional love. But he could not replace the human connection that I desired. I started looking for more opportunities to talk to people. My daughter Sarah was the first to notice this change. When I came to tea one afternoon, he said, "Mom, you're coming to visit more often these days." There was a warmth in his voice that I hadn't heard in years. I realized that my distance from others also made them feel empty. I don't want to spend so much time alone," I said. I wasn't ready to tell him about my strange connection with Charlie. How can I do that? I was ashamed of it, and Sarah was always thinking in practical terms. He could not have understood how deep my loneliness was. Smiling, he said, "We are always with you, Mom." "You know that," he said. His words comforted me, but at the same time I felt a regret. Why hadn't I come back to her sooner? Why me? Over the years, I allowed my pain and loneliness to lead me to such a strange emotional connection with a dog instead of my own family. I kept trying harder to reconnect with the world outside my little house. I started reading books. There was something I hadn't done in a long time at the local library club. It was hard for me to sit there and chat with other women. They were all talking about their children and grandchildren, their lives full of people. I felt like I didn't belong. My years of loneliness had made me forget how to connect with others. But gradually I began to enjoy friendship with them. We would discuss novels over cups of tea, laugh at the plot, and characters who reminded us of people we knew. It felt good to laugh again. I feel that lightness that has long been missing in my chest. Charlie remained my constant friend, but I started to be more careful about the boundaries I had to set. I no longer allowed him to sleep in bed with me. It was a habit. Instead, I thrived on my darkest days. I would gently stroke his head before going to bed, and he would settle into his comfortable bed at my feet. At first it was hard to resist the temptation to pull him to me and let this warmth comfort me as it used to be. But I knew that I had to be determined as the months went by. Gradually, I began to realize that I was changing. Despite the fact that I suspected that there would always be a place for Tom in my heart and always would be, the feeling of loneliness that had once fallen on me so heavily no longer bothered me. It made me look for solace in Charlie. But I was slowly starting to learn that pain and emptiness are experiences that everyone has, and therefore they do not determine who I am. I had friends, people I could call. I had Charlie. But I knew that although his love was boundless, it wasn't the kind of love I wanted. On a bright autumn afternoon, about a year after that strange turning point about Charlie, I can truly say that I have reached the halfway point. I went for a walk in the park. Charlie was walking happily beside her. It's cool. The leaves were flying and the smell of pine trees was spreading in the air. When I looked around, I saw other people walking their dogs. Laugh and talk. Some of my friends really surprised me. How easy it is to enjoy the companionship of human and animal, as Charlie stops to smell the fallen leaves. His tail wagged with satisfaction, so I smiled at him. "You're a good dog." I said this softly, scratching his ears, and he looked at me with his big brown eyes, full of the same love and loyalty that he had always shown. But now I realize what she is. Pure, simple, and unconditional. However, this was not enough to fill the gap that human relations should address. In the following months, I found myself opening up more. I took my family in and shared the challenges I faced, confronting the loneliness that consumed me after Tom's death. I even hinted to Sarah, in a roundabout way, how much I was starting to trust Charlie. He listened quietly, his face full of understanding, and when I was done, he hugged me tight. "Mom," he said in a soft voice, "we're always here." And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. I didn't have to go through this alone. There were people who loved me, who wanted to help me get through my pain. And I realized that although Charlie was a vital part of this journey, he couldn't be my whole world anymore. He was my dog, my loyal friend, but I needed to start trusting the people around me again. Looking back, I've seen how loneliness can lead you into strange situations, how it can lead you to form bonds that others may not understand. But in the end, what is important is the connections with people, the attention and support shown by family and friends. Charlie will always have a special place in my heart, but now I'm starting to accept the world beyond my quiet home once again. We're finally here, Charlie. I'm lying at my feet. I feel peaceful but natural. And this is a real indication that I'm reconnecting to the source of my pain and taking the people closest to me to my home. After all, this is a bond that ultimately heals our hearts. Temporary postponement of loneliness with others never happens, no matter how loyal the influence of a dog, even.